My guest today creates images of the world we live in, or one that we might, could, or will inhabit. Phillip Toledano's photographs are hyper-real, seductively stylish, and shot through with a tongue-in-cheek sense of humour. As he presents his latest book, Another England, at the Paris Photo Fair, Phillip joins us in the studio to tell us more about it. Phillip, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, these are visions, as I said, of things that you write might have happened, could happen, or will never happen. But the images themselves don't look very sci-fi. They're a bit retro in their texture. How did you make them?
These images are all done through Midjourney, which is artificial intelligence. And the basic premise of all my AI work is to talk about our radically redefined relationship with the image, with the photography. The idea of photography as truth is dead. And so we live in this kind of liminal space, like because AI exists, everything is true and nothing is true at the same time. And so these images reflect this kind of strange cognitive imbalance that we live in.
Okay, well, there's a lot of humour in this book that I noticed, from floral human hybrids to water slides in cathedrals, women who decided to biologically merge with their pets. And the series has been very warmly received by some, less so by others. Let's hear a couple of reviews of Another England.
Well, I have to admit, I'm still scratching my head over this new project of Phillip Toledano's. I look at it and I think I see what he's driving at, and then it slips away like smoke.
You know, when I saw Phillip Toledano's new images, I thought, finally, someone is not afraid of intelligence. They are daring, poetic, but with the sharpness of a scalpel. It is very rare.
I must confess, I find myself rather puzzled by the extraordinary enthusiasm for this new book of Mr. Phillip Toledano.
So I must say, these are not real reviews.
They are invented reviews for invented history.
Yes, absolutely. These are, I suppose, what we would call deep fakes.
Absolutely.
And they've been in the headlines a lot recently for their capacity in a news context to swing public opinion, even maybe pervert the democratic process.
Sure.
But from an artistic point of view, for you, what do you think this new dawn means for ownership, for copyright, for having, authorship of your creations?
Well, it's a bit of a tricky question because, of course, AI learns from everything it sees. And I mean, in a way, it functions much the way an artist does. Every image, when I was a photographer, every photograph I ever took was a result of everything I'd ever seen. And AI functions the same way. It's just it's owned by a corporation. But the history of art is the history of theft. So this time it's kind of institutionalized, which makes it different.
And I guess that, do you worry as an artist that you're being erased, pushed out of the process?
Well, it's so fascinating. When people talk about AI, they always seem to talk about it and omit the hand of the artist. Because it's not like there's kind of an AI entity sitting around waiting for me to send it an email going, hey, do you have any pictures of England in an unusual kind of way? And it just sends me a bunch of files. Like, I have to think of the idea and I have to craft that idea. Often it takes anywhere from a couple of days to a week or two to get the image exactly as I want it.
So you're very much in there still. Now, this latest book comes after your projects, Another America and We Are at War. They also use AI in a very surreal but convincing way to imagine alternative histories. Now, this happens in both mid-century America and the D-Day landings of the Second World War. The United States, I guess, had a very specific, very powerful image at that point in history. How did you subvert the image of America with your visuals?
Well, Another America is set in New York in the 1940s and 50s, and I chose that era because we're all intimately familiar with that style of image, so we're sort of predisposed to believe it. When you see a picture of the 1950s, you think it's true. So I thought that would be very interesting to reinvent a history of New York, and what's interesting about that is when you decide to reinvent a 10-year period of history, you have to think about everything: the fashion, the disasters that happened. You reinvent landmarks that never existed. Like, you have to invent an entire world, and in a way, it's incredibly exhilarating to have that much control over an entire world.
Reshape society in a way.
Yeah.
And I believe you live and work in the US today,
I do.
in New York. How do you see American society today in your vision?
Well, that's a very interesting question and a little bit of a sad answer. I think that what's happening now, I think for the last 70 or 80 years, we lived outside of moving history. And now we're firmly inside of history and it's moving very quickly. And I think you forget, or we forgot as a society, how quickly events can move, how quickly society can change in radical ways. And I think that's what's happening to America right now.
We certainly see it in the news cycle
Sure.
on a channel like France 24. Now, we saw in that video of yours the late UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in reviewing your book.
Yes.
But she's also very much in Another England. She's carved into the white cliffs of Dover. And you write, quote, 60 feet of limestone grimace glaring eternally towards France. You also say that she's eternal, impossible to ignore. How do you see the long shadow of Thatcher over Britain today?
Well, I remember as a kid growing up in the 80s, I was definitively not a Thatcher fan. And it's very interesting in the context of kind of the political lunacy that's happening now, the rehabilitation of people like Reagan or people like Thatcher who were kind of reviled at the time. And now they're kind of seen almost as sort of a softer, more sane version of politics, which is remarkable. I mean, people look back at George Bush with fondness in America, when at the time he was kind of a joke.
And I suppose that photograph of yours, image. Does say a lot about the UK's relationship with France. How would you say that has evolved?
I'm not sure. I mean, I guess if you can go back to Brexit, it's kind of such an exemplary. It's an example of how how England sees foreigners, and France in particular. I don't think that kind of strange, ill-founded suspicion has ever changed, and I'm always confounded by it because I have a lot of half my family's French. So I think there's been probably no change at all, really.
It certainly seems, like you say, quaint looking back at what that was politically compared to now. Now, as well as famous faces, you also use your own likeness in your artwork quite often, transforming yourself with prosthetics. For one series, maybe many photographers have done that in the History of Art. Man Ray, Diane Arbus, Cindy Sherman. What did you take away from becoming these characters, inhabiting these alternative selves?
Well, the purpose of Maybe was based on the sort of precipitous death of my parents. I got really obsessed with this idea of the sudden right angles that life has in store for us that are unseen. So I thought I'd do a project where I'd envision all the worst possible things that would happen to me. So I talked to fortune tellers, tarot card readers, and I said, tell me only the terrible things that will happen to me. And then my wife said this is a very peculiar way of processing grief. And then I worked with a prosthetic expert to become these versions of myself. And the thing that was most extraordinary for me was going from a man of 45 to 95 in a wheelchair, let's say, and being pushed around by a nurse. And because we age incrementally. So when you age suddenly like that, you really realize how invisible you are to the world. The world looks through you because you don't count anymore, because you're an old man in a wheelchair. And so those kind of experiences, the physicality of being seen differently, that was really extraordinary for me.
It's really fascinating from an anthropological point of view. And of course, you've explored other parts of the human experience, like fatherhood, from the perspective of a son in regards to your father. And as a father, you made a very touching film of your daughter interacting with an iPad. When you consider her generation's relationship with technology, do you think they're going to lose all touch with sort of handmade things, craft in the creative industries?
It's very interesting because there's a tendency, I suppose, as a parent or as anyone who's to look back and think, well, the way you had it was the best way it was. So when I look at Lulu, I see the way she interacts with technology. I see when her friends come over, they gather around iPads, they look at stuff together. It's a totally different kind of thing than what we did. But is that better or worse? It's hard to say. It just is. I mean, if you think about like the 18th century when the novel was decried as a great corrupter of young women. I mean, at every point, there's always a technology that's seen as somehow destroying the youth. Rock and roll music is the great example. So I'm not sure. I mean, she's mesmerized by it, but she's also very aware of the downfalls of technology.
And like you say, they're engaging with imagery, but just through a different media, because in the past we might have seen images on glossy paper, billboards. Sure. Now we often encounter them on a screen, on a phone or a computer. How have you seen that influence the style, the way images are produced? What sort of images are produced?
Well, I think it's not the way images are produced, it's perhaps the way images are consumed. Because, and that in a way is a large part of my AI work. We have this kind of trifecta, a perfect storm in terms of the perfect system of dissemination, the phone, and social media. Then we have AI, which makes these images, but then we have the way in which we digest images, and we don't spend any time considering images. We just flick past them or forward them. So we're in a constant state of flicking or forwarding in a way. We're not analyzing, considering. And that, to your point, makes things dangerous. Because when you see something interesting, it may or may not have happened, but you just like, that looks crazy. I'm just going to pass it on to my friend. And they're going to say, that looks crazy. I'll pass it on to my friend. No, there's no critical thinking happening.
Yeah. But from an aesthetic point of view, I guess you have to take this into consideration as someone who makes images, that it might be seen on a smaller
Absolutely.
surface.
I mean, I guess the simple answer is that a very graphic, simple image probably functions best in a smaller bit of acreage. But I've always, even when I was a photographer, my images, I mean, the images I make with AI and the images I made as a photographer are very similar in terms of how they're kind of constructed.
And the concept, the spirit, the sense of humour.
There's all, I mean, if I want to sound pompous, I say I'm a conceptual artist, which I am.
Yeah.
But so the idea, it always starts with an idea. And then, of course, whatever peculiar sense of humor I have sneaks into that.
And it translates on whatever scale it's
That's right.
published on. Phillip Toledano, thank you so much for joining us
Thank you so
today.
much.
A reminder that Philip is signing copies of that new book, Another England, at the Bifurcal Fair here in the French capital. That annual event is an opportunity to see some of the most exciting work from almost 200 galleries from around the world. It's also the best place to check out new books from the world of photography too. We'll wrap up the show with a look at what's on offer at this year's Bifurcal. Otherwise, do join us next time for more movies, arts and culture. There's more news coming up just after this.